Hi, thanks for watching. I'm going to talk a little bit about the New Zealand tour of England now. Two tests this one. It's been a little bit of time since we've last talked cricket. Not much going on, and there's not a lot hard scheduled over the next couple of months. Obviously, the Ashes is a big focus, and I'm actually going to have a written preview to that on my blog. I'll put a link there in the YouTube description. Let's look at the curtain raiser, New Zealand for two tests in England. I'm going to talk about England first, then have a little bit of time for New Zealand after that. Again, New Zealand have been very, very busy. This is their sixth series in less than a year. Most of those series are two tests, as is this one. But yeah, so I've covered a lot of ground. But we will talk about them a little bit. England first. Now, England went to New Zealand obviously recently and drew 0-0. A series where they probably were outclassed by New Zealand, surprisingly so. They were flat. It's a really sort of overused word, but were flat. And probably had the best of the second test, but really the third test was one they were very lucky to get away with. Matt Pryor famously had a big century, as he typically does. He's had a great career, really. But I think the biggest issue I had when I looked at that series, and something that jumped out at me, was the work of Monty Panesar. As you may be aware, Graham Swan is out with an elbow injury for quite some time. And Panesar and Swan were at the heart of a lot of good things for England last year, particularly in India. With Graham Swan out, possibly for the Ashes, and it's impossible to talk about this series without one eye on the Ashes. Sorry, that's Swan I mentioned might be out for the Ashes. Panesar suddenly had a different look to him. He had a great 2012. Took 5.5 wickets a match at 26.03, including a decisive 10-wicket match in the second test, the turning point of the India series. And looked like he was going to be easily a test-class bowler, maybe something a bit more than that, and an able replacement if Swan was out. That didn't look like that in New Zealand. He was certainly very economical. There's no question about that. He had a couple of innings where he was comfortably below 2 runs and over. They took no wickets. Took 1.7 wickets a match at 70 against New Zealand, in lots of overs, I might add, as well. Very innocuous. Sort of the Monty Panesar of all his detractors, where he's bowling at one pace, there's no variation. Yes, he can hold up an end, but again, England playing four bowlers can't afford to just have a hold up an end guy. For a similar reason, they have trouble with Stephen Finn, who I'm not a fan of at all. Probably have mentioned that in a previous preview. Stephen Finn is sort of the anti-Panesar, the other sort of problem. One of the worst economy rate bowlers in the world, maybe the worst. I had a look at his economy rate in that series, the New Zealand series, 3.62 economy rate, 39.2 average. Those, particularly the economy rate, is in line with his career, which is now 20 matches old. Looking at bowlers who have bowled a significant amount of time in the last 3 years, which is when Finn has been playing, you look at Srisanth, Yadav, Fidel Edwards, Mitchell Johnson, and Imran Tahir are the only ones with an economy rate higher than Finn, and none of those are regular test starters for their team. I don't think any of them actually played in the last series that their team played. So Stephen Finn is going to be a problem for this English attack again, because it's a four-man attack. It's a bit of an issue with guys like Stephen Finn, because there are times you can't bowl them. You have a new batsman on and you want to bowl this apparent strike bowler in Stephen Finn, but his first two overs go for 12 and suddenly the batsman's got to start. England can't afford either kind of bowler. They can't afford Panesar not taking wickets, and they can't afford Finn leaking runs. Because they have such an absolute dearth of fifth options, every single bowler in that attack needs to be solid, needs to do everything reasonably well, because there's no Shane Watson option, there's no Kane Williamson option for New Zealand, for instance, and a variety of other Muhammad Hafiz and this kind of stuff. So because Jonathan Trott is not there, Joe Root's not there, in terms of being a viable fifth option, everyone needs to perform well, and Stephen Finn's almost at a crossroads now. I know he has many backers, but he's going to need to bring his economy rate into line. 3.62 is not test standard, and it's going to cost England potentially some victories. That said, Stuart Broad, as well as the other guy that everyone's talking about in this English attack, Broad, I thought, has had a bit of a rough run with the media recently. He's had 3.6 wickets a match at 31.7 since January 1st of 2012. Those aren't great numbers at all, but again, Broad is still a developing cricketer, and they're not bad numbers. And Broad has had some very good test matches there. The bat's another issue for another time. But Stuart Broad has had his moments, even in the last 15 months. And if we remember before that, 4.7 wickets a match at 22.3 in 2011 from a bowler who's 25 years old and can bat at number 8. And again, I understand that's maybe in jeopardy. That's a serious talent. That's one of the most promising young players in the world. Maybe the most promising player in the world. I don't think we should be worrying too much about Stuart Broad, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he had a big series here. It's important for him to do so, there's no question. Obviously, even more important for the Ashes. But Stuart Broad's numbers are not disastrous. There's no reason for anyone to talk about an English team without him in it, particularly presuming he's got a bit of time off now to recover from his heel injury. And if we look at 2010, Stuart Broad was taking 2.6 wickets a match at 37.69. So, again, reports of his death have been severely overrated or exaggerated. Alistair Cook, obviously we know he's great. He's going to be a problem for New Zealand because everything about their team in terms of their success, and we'll come to this in a moment, relies on getting new ball wickets. Cook actually, it's a pretty amazing stat, has scored at least 94 as his highest score in 9 of his last 10 series. To give you an idea, Ed Cowan's made 94 or more once in his career, and he's played now 17 test matches. More than that, actually, I think, but 30 innings. So in 30 innings, Cowan's passed that mark once. Cook has done it in 9 of the last 10 series. Since the start of the Ashes, he's averaging 62.61, 4.6 century rate. That's been the key, just sitting centuries all the time. 11 of them, in fact, since the start of the Ashes in 2010, which was late 2010. 27 years old, I think. Again, someone's going to have all the records by the time it's done. That's a bit of a look at the recent statistical profile of England. As for New Zealand, look, Peter Fulton had a big series, scored 2 centuries in the last test. But prior to that last test, look, in the 12 tests previous to that, 23.05, had not scored a century ever, with a 10.5 score percentage. Those are numbers that a number 8 would be maybe content with. He's 34 years old. It's very unlikely that Peter Fulton is suddenly going to become this hugely different player. He had an amazing few days, but is a liability. And inevitably, he'll play both tests here, and probably should based on those results. But if you look at those numbers, and you look at Anderson and Broad, what I've said about Broad earlier, fish food, presumably. Ross Taylor, I always talk about Ross Taylor's stats before a New Zealand series because he's such a key player. 43.13. 8.5 century rate and 29.4% scoring against England, which is pretty reasonable numbers. They're more or less, again, in line with his career figures, pretty closely mirroring his career figures. He had a career year, I thought, in 2012, despite the whole drama about the captaincy. He had a great year. 54.96, 6 century rate, 27.8 score percentage. And he's 29, so he's essentially in the prime of his career. For New Zealand to make any noise, I understand they did it without Taylor making much noise in New Zealand, but I think that this time there's not really too many bones about it. Ross Taylor's going to have a big series. Focus for New Zealand is primarily on maybe Hamish Rutherford, who made a century in the first test, possibly proving that he's got something there. Kane Williamson's continued development. It's been incremental for a long time with Williamson, but he is very young. I say this every time, but we've talked about New Zealand a lot. But it is important to remember. And he is developing, slowly but surely, and still, again, 23 years old, I think, so no need to rush Rutherford. To see him make some strides here, make, say, a couple of scores would be nice. At least one score would be good. And the main sort of focus for New Zealand's success at the moment is that pace battery with Southey and Wagner and Bracewell potentially and Bolt. Really good young pace bowlers. And they should play them all, I might add. And I'll revisit that with the Ashes as well with Australia. But New Zealand should play all those pace bowlers. Don't need to be too precious about slow bowling options. To get the young players in the team, which they're doing, and getting them developing. England, huge series for them. England need to make a statement here. I say need. Look, I think they're going to win the Ashes no matter what happens here, even if they are lackluster again. But drawing 0-0 in New Zealand, look, you can sort of go, well, bit flat, whatever, not that big a deal. But it was a big deal. 3 test matches. There wasn't that much weather about. And they didn't particularly look like dominating New Zealand at any point. Presumably they'll do better in their home digs. But that needs to be seen. I think they need to, not so much for the Australian series, but just as a statement about where they are in cricket, need to win these 2 tests in a big way, by an innings. So I'm talking very serious beatdowns to make up for the lackluster performance in New Zealand. I don't know if they'll do that, but I do think they'll win both tests. 2-0 is what I'm predicting here for the English. And again, stay tuned for the Ashes preview. This is a curtain raiser, and there should be some decent cricket to watch. And the last 0-0 result makes it a little bit more intriguing than it may have otherwise been. Thanks for watching, everyone.